Today we are talking about Israel. So just to check in, could we go around and say just our relationship with Israel, where it currently is, what maybe led up to it, but we have to keep our presentations under a minute max. It can be shorter than that, but no longer than that.
You want me to start? I mean,
whoever wants
I'll
to
start. I mean, my relationship with Israel is, as the grandson of Holocaust survivors, I really believe Israel is the only true security that Jewish people have that can give me a home. God forbid there's another Holocaust. So I support Israel. I've been there twice. I have relatives there. I've not always agreed with a lot of their policies. I'll be quite frank. With taking resources from the West Bank and Gaza, it has bothered me often, and I've always been somewhat upset when the people who are like open-minded and liberal-minded just are pure apologists for Israel, and I haven't been. But I actually, after reading this book that I read, Son of Hamas, I actually now realize at least you cannot. Yes, certain things that Israel does, I think they shouldn't do, like using the resources, taking resources, but you cannot make peace with Hamas. It's impossible. They need to be destroyed. There's no way to have a two-state solution with them.
But this is less your relationship and more thing. I want to keep us on track very
Yeah.
much. So we're not talking about Hamas.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
But I sort of like I love it.
Conversation.
I'm glad that it's there and I feel part of it.
Excellent.
And I just like the fact that I can eat a really good shawarma.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's a new kosher shawarma place that opened.
Yeah, in South River.
Yes.
I've been there. My friend took me there. It's yummy.
Are you familiar with shawarma? Shawarma is when you go to those Middle Eastern restaurants and they have that giant skewer, vertical skewer covered in meat, where they then shave off the meat and then stick it in a pita or a lafa or some kind of wrap. So let's continue going around different relationships with Israel. Either way.
I guess I don't have very much. You're very eloquent, and I enjoyed your response. Israel's one of those places I'm really glad is there, and someday I hope to go there. My mom went twice, and she can't say enough good about it. And my sister went once too, though I think that summer was because my sister was dating a non-Jewish boy. It was my parents' way of trying to push her into a different direction, which no problem because she's been married twice and they were both Jewish.
Is she still married to the
She
second?
is, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, I just, I fear for them. And my husband's not Jewish, and he's kind of astounded how Jews are, the way we feel is Israel's part of our life. Like he says no other religion has that with another country, which I never thought of because we all think of it. It's a part of our life.
It's interesting. Just to comment on that, we say that no other religion has a country, but we are the only people whose religion who as a people, as a religion, we have never had a country other than Israel. Christians, there are many Christian nations.
Exactly, majority.
They're not principal nations, but there are many Christian nations. Not only majority, just nations that have been Catholic. Spain is a Catholic country. Italy.
With the dwindling Catholic population.
Yes. Italy, another Catholic country. Muslims, there are tons of Muslim countries. So yeah, it's more than that, but it's easier to have that perspective, and we seldom understand that now because so many of these religious quote unquote countries have become secular for all intents and purposes.
Right. People go to study there and visit there and all.
But we've never had this experience before.
Right. Well, I think he actually meant the way Jewish Americans feel towards Israel. That allegiance is just kind of there with us all the time.
Yes, very nice. Mary? Okay.
Mine is complicated. As a convert, I don't feel that. I'm glad it's there, but I resent the notion that my conversion is not good enough for the Israeli rabbinate. So it makes me have a very complicated, resentful feeling that we as American Jews do so much to support Israel, but yet my conversion is not enough.
Right, they'll take.
So I can't wait to go, but it's a complicated relationship.
One of the challenges of the rabbinate there is that the rabbinate is increasingly less representative of the population of Israel. And you'd fit right in Israel.
And as the mother of a son who again is very active and nifty and all of the groups for you to then tell me that his conversion is not good enough.
Your son converted?
Yeah, my son was 3 when we got married, and we opted not to do the drop of blood because he was 3. We thought that would be more traumatizing.
Which halakhically there are suggestions, or there is backing for that.
And that's exactly what our rabbi at the time said, was he's 3. And rather than make him fear being Jewish because of traumatizing him at 3, it just didn't make any sense at the time. And the notion that he could be told that he's not Jewish enough over a drop of blood annoys me.
There are minority voices in Israel, both in the, of course in the secular movement, but also in the Orthodox movement, that are speaking against the rabbinate at this point. Just to
and
make
I'm
you a little
glad
bit more
to
comfortable.
Hear that. And I definitely want to support the political activist part of it that is trying to shift that to a more central or liberal point of view, because we talk a lot about, yesterday we talked about, in our confirmation class, we talked about Jewish population lagging and those kinds of things. In a population that may struggle to keep up, how you decide to keep people out over small things in the big scheme of things is not cute. So
I'm going to keep us moving, but thank you for sharing.
My relationship with Israel is fairly minimal, to be honest. I have no relatives who I can trace back there, or none that I know of who have visited. So I would say it's just very minimal, because there's no, other than knowing it's the Jewish land, there's nothing else that links me personally. So
he comes from the family that at Pesach says next year back in wherever. Next year in next year in New Jersey. Next year in Long Island.
Next year in Odessa.
Do you mind if I ask him a very quick question, because somebody said you mind without getting too much? What's your name again? I forgot.
Brian.
But you have this notion that I'm glad there's a country that, in case there's another Holocaust, can take in Jews.
No, I'm definitely
do you feel that you kind of don't fear that anymore?
I don't fear it as much, because we're in this country, which you can argue on any given day may be safer than Israel at times, and not every day, of course, but there is some of that feeling. So it's a nice sort of global feeling of, well, this place exists and this is what it is for and what it represents.
Right.
But it's not on a day-to-day, I'm worried, so now I know I have this as a backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
Really doesn't enter my
thinking. I'm a sugar farmer in Jamaica.
I would think it's just safer in the United States than you are in Israel. My granddaughter, who's 20 years old, she keeps telling me she wants to go to Israel when she's off in the summertime. And last summer she couldn't go because they said to her, they're fighting over there. I'm not going to let you out of the country or anything like that. We went to Israel 4 years ago. We went with Rabbi Bravo. And we were going down one of the main roads, and I guess Gaza was about 20 miles away, and you could actually hear the bombs going off. And it's funny because none of us were afraid. We figured, they wouldn't let us come to Israel if something was wrong or anything like that. But yet, it got a little hairy hearing the bombs. And every time I hear there's something going on in Israel, I turn around to my grandchildren and I say, no, you can't go this year. Maybe next year you can go, but I would like them to go because I've been there and I think it's the greatest place going. I mean, just to see it is something that every Jewish person should see, definitely.
I think that's a beautiful thing to begin conversation, or to continue the conversation towards the plan for today, which is the holiday. Right now we are at the tail end of Yom HaZikaron, which is the day of remembrance for the fallen soldiers, for those soldiers who have died defending creating the state of Israel, and then juxtaposed with it is Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. Etzem is like the essence of something, so it's really the day of becoming, the day of essence of Israel. So I wanted to start off, and in this book, Altsenu, which is it's a reform book on the land of Israel and perspective, I thought this was a nice brief synopsis of general Jewish relationship with Israel. Serge, do you want a handout, by the way?
Yeah, I was like following.
Yes. So I thought this might be something good to begin with. So, would anyone like to read from the top?
I'll do it. If I may.
Yes.
Israel is Artsenu. Artsenu means our land.
Eretz being land, nu, us, like in French, so Artsenu, our land.
See, I thought it was like Yiddish. No. Israel was Jacob's other name. The family of Israel became the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel moved into the land of Canaan and made it the land of Israel.
So really, the name of our people, in a sense, the name of the state of Israel, goes back to the final patriarch, who really, the division between the three Abrahamic faiths, ended with him. Because Abraham, you get Christianity, Islam, and Judaism from. Abraham is the father of all three. Ishmael branches off, you get the Muslims from him, and then you've got Jacob and Esau. Esau, of course, becomes Edom, which is Rome, and which becomes the Holy Roman Empire eventually. Although, I guess you have two branches to Christianity. One of them is Rome, the other one's Jesus, who comes from the Jews. Okay, so, anyways, we take our name from Israel. We take our name from our ancestors.
Jews have always lived in Israel since return from Babylonian exile. I met some Muslim people whose name is Jake. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yes.
I'm sorry. There weren't always a lot of Jews, but Jews have always lived there. Israel has been ruled by the Greeks, the Romans, the Muslims, the Crusaders, the Turks, the British, and that is only the short list.
Israel is at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and Asia, and the Arabian Peninsula, and it's in a fertile path. It's part of the Fertile Crescent, which means that it has been fought over not just because the Jews were there, but because it was a very valuable piece of territory. Had a lot of natural resources, but an excellent location. You know, location.
Yeah. I see it's like Metuchen near 287, the Parkway Turnpike. It's the brain place. Like
But
brain city.
right. The principle is, as soon as we were let back in Israel after the first exile to Babylon,
people wanted it.
yes, but people wanted it from before that. But as soon as we got back, the point of this is that we've always been here. That it may have been a small Jewish presence living in the boonies in Israel, in the mountains, but that Jews have been there since biblical time. We have archaeological evidence. This, by the way, is biased, and we can talk about other sides of that. But this is also truthful.
Yeah.
Yes. Questions so far? Comments?
No, I met a couple Muslims.
Oh, wait, hold on, Mary.
I'm so sorry.
It says something here starting in the 1800s.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Jews moved.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I didn't realize Israel was there in the 1800s.
We'll get to that in a second, but first.
Yeah, I met a couple Muslims whose name is Yaakov, and I would thought I was strange to me. I thought the Muslims were not like Jacob.
Oh, a good name's a good name. We also have Jews named Ishmael.
Do we really?
Oh yeah, there's a very famous rabbi in the Talmud, Rabbi Ishmael.
Ah.
Oh yeah. Ellen, did you have a question or a comment?
I was thinking I know Jewish kids named Ryan these days.
Well, that's different.
Yeah.
A name's a name these days, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so starting in the 1800s, who wants to pick up the reading? Thank you.
Starting in the 1800s, Jews began moving back to Israel with the hope of creating a new Jewish state. Halutzim, pioneers, moved to Israel, bought land, and settled it. In some cases, they turned swamps into fertile fields. A lot of things happened. World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, and the United Nations resolution.
Understatement of the year. A lot happened, some good, some bad. 1800s, that's when Zionism really began. I mean, Herzl Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, really started speaking. You had many more Zionist movements in Russia and the Soviet bloc. It wasn't called the Soviet bloc then, in the late 1800s. But you had these aliyot, the groups that went up to Israel to really try to, which was at that point first under the Turks, under the Ottomans, and then under the British, it was British Mandate Palestine, following World War I. And you had different waves of people that went up, that bought land, and that really tried to turn this wasteland, in a sense, into something viable. Something fecund, something that we could live off of, which we did, but the first time we didn't. The first Aliyah was largely a failure, and because people went with these grand ideas not actually knowing how to do agriculture. It would be me saying, oh, I can go and be a career farmer without any training in a different climate. Of course, I'll just grow enough tomatoes in my backyard. My backyard's probably big enough to make a living off of growing mushrooms. I was learning about that. Mushroom is the highest yield of money for the lowest yield of investment.
Highest profit margin?
Yes.
Rat pot?
Not yet.
Everybody would like mushrooms for a long time. Okay, so...
Different kind of mushroom.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, any questions on that paragraph? So we get the UN resolution. And let's be clear, often we painted that Israel happened because of the Holocaust, because the world felt guilty. That is not true at all. It worked out that at the end of the Shoah, the Holocaust, we had a place to go, but Israel was in the works for a very long time prior to that. That for a long time, Herzl was triggered because of the Dreyfus affair with Alfred Dreyfus, where the idea was that when we were emancipated, we could be citizens of these countries, like here in America. That when we would become citizens, we would be equal. No one would hate us anymore. And then we saw in France, the home of the revolution, Vive la Révolution, that all of a sudden all this anti-Semitism come out. That Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish military man, would be persecuted for a reason that had absolutely nothing to do with his actions. And then people said, down with the Jews when that happened. And so Herzl saw that. And until we have our own place, we never have that 100% safety. That was his perspective. And this was 1800s. This was way before the Shoah, the Holocaust. So the idea, and Herzl in his lifetime never saw to fruition this idea of Zionism. And he had a horrible family life because he was so devoted to his vision of creating Israel that he didn't really pay enough attention to his wife or kids. But that being said, Herzl really gave us this grand vision that would become the modern state of Israel. It would become modern Zionism. Okay, so we get to 1948. What happens in 1948 on the 5th of Pirate's favorite month, which is ER, the Hebrew month of ER. The month of ER on the Hebrew calendar, it's the Pirate's favorite month. You get it?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't hear chuckles. Okay, so May, what was the date of it? May 14th of May, 5th of ER. Okay, so 14th of May, 1948. Brian, do you want to continue?
Sure. In 1948, a new state of Israel was born. Israel was reborn. Jews from all around the world began the process of making Israel a modern, democratic, creative, inventive force. Israel, a Hebrew-speaking nation that struggles with how religious and non-religious live together, with how Jew and non-Jew share a Jewish state that has lots of problems and lots of opportunities, has become the Jewish homeland.
So this is nice. This doesn't paint it as a rosy picture, but it's the Jewish project. What if Jews...
It's in May. Why are we celebrating now?
Because we celebrate according to the Hebrew
That's
calendar.
what I thought, but I just had dinner with someone that asked that
Right.
question. So
Everything happened very early this year, in the same way that the high holidays are going to be, I use the word very seriously, ridiculously early.
I know. It already happened.
It happens periodically.
That's not when Jesus was born.
And then you're on.
Well, at least then we have a solid run afterwards.
True.
Well, look at Hanukkah. It's the day before Thanksgiving.
Exactly. But anyways, that Israel's the challenge. It's the grand Jewish experiment. What if we had a state to run according to core values. What could happen? And it points out that it's not necessarily happening. There are problems, but there are also great opportunities. And the goal is to create a Jewish state that really is a state that is a light unto the nations, that really demonstrates what are the ideals. We know that we've succeeded in the ideals of what would happen if everybody had a really good education. Or a lot of people, what happens is you get a giant high-tech industry. Our kids are really good at math. Not everybody, and there's still inequalities in that education system, but there are a lot of what-ifs that we now have the opportunity to answer according to our tradition, in light of our tradition. We also need to say, what if the crazies of our tradition get a lot of power? Well, we've seen what happens too. Okay, so Israel is the place, last paragraph. Mary, do you want to take that?
Israel is the place where any Jew from around the world can find safety and freedom.
So this is the argument that works for Rob.
It is a place that works daily on creating and growing Jewish culture.
That's what I like.
It is Azanu Olam.
Altsenu Olam. So then we celebrate. But we also mourn. And so, remember, this class is not a class about history, though we do get into that. Not a class about politics, though we do get into that. It's a class about customs. What do you do? I apologize for all the toner on this page. I'm going to work that way. So, first, I'm sorry, I put these backwards. So on one side of the page is Yom HaAtzmaut, history and customs. On the other side of the page is Yom HaZikaron, Day of Remembrance, history and customs. These are from the website reformjudaism.org. Reformjudaism.com is a different one. Have you already seen these, Denise?
I didn't click because I figured you would get to it.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to talk briefly about these points. We don't need to read through the whole thing that you're welcome to. It was very deliberate. Yom HaZikaron is all those soldiers who have lost their lives fighting from the War of Independence to create the State of Israel to present day. We remember, we honor them, and it's really solemn. Unlike here, everybody in Israel knows somebody was dead. Everybody is touched by the price that they paid to fight for Jewish homeland. I tell you, as somebody who supports Israel, I still struggle with the fact that I did not put my life on the line, that I did not do what it took. I had an Israeli soldier tell me, well, you're doing something else with your life to really bring the Jewish people up. Maybe. I mean, yes, but to me that's different. I'm not actually risking my life by, I mean, some people might say I'm risking my life at the B'nai Mitzvah when they all throw the candy at me repeatedly every week.
It's a risk I wouldn't mind taking, yeah. Having candy thrown at me, yeah.
The rapper, it's not as, it's celebratory and exciting, but I try to dodge that. Anyway, so it's very solemn this day, and legally all places of entertainment are closed. No Memorial
even
Day.
Restaurants are closed?
Restaurants are not necessarily places of entertainment. But clubs, bars would be closed.
Okay.
No Memorial Day sales.
That's the only Memorial Day sales.
Well, in Israel, it'll be the place where if it says sale, it's not because Memorial Day, it's because the word sale is always up to get people in the store. You know those kinds of places. And what they will do is at about 11 a.m., I believe, there will be a siren that goes off. And I believe it's at 11 a.m. There's also an evening ceremony. But a siren that goes off, and literally people will stop in their cars in the streets. And they'll get out and they'll stand and they'll hold silence for 2 minutes. Back home in Canada, I don't know how it's done here if there's silence, but at the 11th minute of the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, on November 11th, that is our Remembrance Day. Or we also in school always said, poem in Flanders, fields, the poppies grow between thy crosses, row by row, that mark their place. I have it memorized mostly.
We don't do that
We
here.
have the sale.
Yeah.
I think
We
they
don't
do.
have
The president
Wow.
leads it,
My mom
and
had
we all look at
memorized
it.
So even
That
more
was
so
the
than this, in
regular
Israel, there's the military sirens go. Emergency
Hurry.
sirens, and everybody hears them, and everybody takes that moment. Because everyone is hit. And so they have an official ceremony at the Western Wall, this thing that we fought so hard for in 1967 to get Jerusalem. And the the flag of the staff is lowered. Places of entertainment are closed, yes. And radio and TV stations all play programs about war, and there's actually a channel that for those 24 hours will list the names of everybody who is 15.
Wow.
And people will turn their TVs to that station. You also have this kind of thing on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And there are prayers, of course, in cemeteries. People go to the cemeteries, you would expect, and there are many national ceremonies, and it draws to a close at Mount Herzl, where it's a cemetery where very important people are honored, and of course Theodore Herzl, his body was brought and is buried at the top. And out here in the diaspora, sometimes people do services for it. Diaspora being everything outside of Israel where Jews live. The more theological term is galut, which means exile. Diaspora is a less loaded term. Exactly. So at the shul today, we lit a memorial to honor them, but I think it is important that we do something to mark Yom HaZikaron. The question is what some people will look for the time that a siren will be going off in Israel and try to have a moment of silence in their homes at that exact same time. It could be that something we do is try to make a point of honoring our own soldiers here, to remember the sacrifice that people make for us. Something to think about. But then there's this very interesting emotional juxtaposition. It was very deliberate, placing Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, immediately after Yom HaZikaron, where you go literally from one end to the other at midnight. Or at Sunday, sorry, not midnight, because it's on the Jewish calendar. The switch with nightfall brings you from a moment of mourning of Yom HaZikaron immediately into Israel Independence Day.
Okay.
Yom Ha'atzmaut.
So as it becomes morning, you stop your mourning.
Or, sorry, as nightfall hits, you move from mourning to
nightfall.
celebrating.
Okay.
So why is that? Why do you think they made that decision? The answer is on the page, but why do you think the decision was made?
I think they wanted to show. I think that it would give a greater appreciation for Yom Ha'atzmaut if it's right after the day of Memorial. So if it happened 3 months later, it's like having a nice big steak dinner right after fasting on Yom Kippur. You really would feel it, and you oh my God, it's amazing. You appreciate it more because you went to the other extreme.
You recognize,
so that's what I think.
Right, and you, along those lines, part of it is that you really recognize the sacrifices that these people made.
It's what they're fighting for.
Exactly. That not only are you thinking about past, but you're thinking about the future. These people died for what we're celebrating, and it's worth fighting for. That's very good. It's huge. You also see something very important. This is not the official statement, but I think the fact that Israelis can go from mourning to dancing and back and forth. That is life. I mean, that's life for all of us, but especially when living in the face of the sound of these bombs coming from Gaza that Mary brought up earlier. In the face of constant danger, perhaps, of not knowing what challenges your future may hold in a way that is very existential. America goes off to war. America's wars, thank God, are on the other side of the world. Pardon me?
They're over there.
Exactly, they're over
Deal
there.
with that sort of thing.
Well, except we have these things that happen periodically that are awful, like what's in Boston.
And I'm not too comfortable with what's going on in Korea either.
Right.
Wow,
But that being said, we are not concerned about our very existence. We are not concerned about our nephews and nieces and children's existence unless they go into the army, but it's a career choice. Or it's a choice because they need some structure in their lives. So Israel, it's a very different story.
Can I make some comment? It's just based on what you were saying before about, like, I have also felt the opposite of where I felt like some Israelis have sort of implicitly put me down and saying I'm not as Jewish as they are because because I don't live in Israel. I didn't go fight. I don't know what it is to fear, to live in fear. And then sometimes I'll explain, But then I'll also tell them, like, look, we Americans do a lot for Israel. American Jews, particularly. Sometimes I feel like they don't appreciate it, and it does bother me a little bit.
I think there are different senses of what we do. I do think we give a lot towards Israel, and I mean, I oscillate between both sides. I do think we have, even though American Jewry does a lot, and I think it's important for Israelis to appreciate it. We don't quite do this. It's much easier to be Jewish in America right now than it is to be. It's much easier as a Jew to have life in America than it is as a Jew to have life in Israel. It's harder to make a living in Israel. You know how many lawyers there are that are unemployed? This is a problem when you get so many overqualified people that move to a state the size of New Jersey.
It actually has the most densely populated amount of docked physicians, mostly because they came from Russia in the world.
Right. But life in Israel is not easy. It's very meaningful.
Yeah.
It can be. So on the one hand, I see where you're coming from, and I'm from that same place. We do a lot for Israel, maybe.
Yeah.
Not everybody does. A lot of people do, but we also don't actually put our lives on the line. We don't give our children's lives to it. So it's just something to think about. But here, let's move to the other side of this page. So how is Yom HaAtzmaut celebrated? In a much more joyous manner. So Yom HaAtzmaut, again, is on the 5th day of Iyar, which happened to be in May 14th, 1948, and David Ben-Gurion issued the declaration, which I have included here. I don't think we'll have time to read through the declaration, but confirmation class, you already have that homework, but I recommend you look through the Declaration of the State of Israel and think about how meaningful it still could be. What is significant there? So, how do we mark Yom HaAtzmaut? How do we mark our celebration, our Independence Day? Barbecues, of course. You grill. In Israel, you can bring barbecues to public parks. So, especially everybody lives in little apartments in the big cities. So, you take your little hibachi grills, and you just bring them to the park, and everybody has their own flames going, and it's a lot of fun. There are concerts, there are parties. I was walking down Rehov Hillel in Jerusalem, Hillel Street, and Hadag Nachash, an Israeli hip-hop group, they were putting on a free concert. It's huge. Fireworks, of course, people gather together. They do the standard Israeli non-religious holiday celebration, even though this essentially did become a religious holiday. And they also, in Israel...
Is that a day off for them?
It's a national day. It's like July 4th here. The teens have a Torah competition and the Israel Prize, which is the highest honor is given, and an award ceremony on that day. And then, of course, there's also an important celebration at Har Herzl, at Mount Herzl, just like the day before, where they honor different people with different torches to come up. And so, likewise here, we'll have a lot of celebrations. We're going to have a celebration at the synagogue tomorrow. If you are in the area, join us at Temple Emanu at 6 o'clock. RSVP, because you need to pay for dinner, I think. Or we just need... No, you don't... Do you need to pay for dinner? Yes, to help contribute. So, show up anyways. But we'll have dinner, we'll have... the cantor and I are still figuring out the program, but there will be some Israeli dancing. There'll be fun facts about Israel. Yes. 6 to 7:15. 7:15,
so we can go to Hebrew.
You can go where?
Beginner's Hebrew.
Yes.
Oh.
And there's still confirmation class happening after.
Well, that's good, because
And
the
then
singles
stay
thing
for
is
you.
at 7:30.
Yeah. So it should be... Oh, the singles thing, chapter 3 is happening? Or not chapter 3?
No, this is Neve.
Oh, excellent.
Was having one at 7:30.
Well, that should be lots of fun. So there's lots of celebration. People will eat Israeli foods out here to really connect. People will talk about Israeli history. It's really... And there are a lot of events that end up happening, including this event that we're co-hosting with Neve this coming Sunday. And we're co-hosting it with Beth Mordechai and Perth Amboy and with the JCC, where it's not enough just to celebrate, but we're trying to develop relationships. So we'll have presentations that are not just rah, 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 Israel, but let's really develop this relationship. Let's have serious conversation about different issues. One of them, my cousin, who volunteered in the Israeli army, he actually did go and put his life down on the line. He'll be speaking about his experiences in what will probably be a very interesting and probably very colorful way. He's a colorful character.
This is the one at Neve?
Yes.
You've heard him before? Is that what you're?
No. Colorful.
What time
Yes.
is he speaking?
I believe 11 a.m.
Okay, because that's at the
10:30.
beginning of the...
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will be speaking as well. I'll be speaking about the young generations in Israel, where people stand today. Rabbi Zelizer will be speaking about something. Rabbi Saxon Perth Amboy will be speaking. And there'll be activities for kids. There'll be demonstrations of different things: Israeli dancing, cooking, Krav Maga, which is Israeli martial arts.
Right.
So the idea is really, with Yom HaAtzmaut, it's to connect us in different ways. To connect us to our state, because it is our state. And so it's a much simpler conversation, I guess, in terms of how we celebrate it. Some people will have religious services that are, well, for people who pray every day, of course, there's a service. But especially some of the more ultra-Orthodox groups that aren't explicitly Zionist and don't see the creation of the modern state of Israel as a particularly religious event. There was an interesting comment from one Orthodox rabbi. Somebody said, well, will you say Hallel? Hallel is the section of the of psalms that you add for holidays, for religious holidays. And he said, well, the original founders of the state of Israel were secular, which means they weren't saying Hallel, so I probably shouldn't either. But some of us, I would say Hallel. I would. So those are the only other religious aspects. Does anyone have any questions?
How have you spent time? How much time have you spent in Israel?
Okay. Oh, yeah, I didn't share my relationship. I love Israel dearly, and for me, Israel, that I see its beauty. I think the safe haven is important, but I don't think that's a compelling argument for people in our generation. I mean, the whole point that you never know, though. That's the whole point. It could happen, but in the same way that saying you need to be Jewish because we need to survive. You can't let Hitler win. That's not compelling. That's not a good reason to be Jewish. You be Jewish because it's awesome.
Right.
Because it's a meaningful tradition. It brings light into our lives, and it helps us take everyday moments and elevate them. That's compelling to me. In the same way that Israel, it's a safe haven. Okay, maybe it is, but that's not compelling. So what? Good for us. What are we going to do with it? I have a pile of gold. Okay, are you going to sit on a pile of gold, or are you going to do something to stimulate the economy? I wish I had a pile of gold. If anybody needs to unload a pile of gold, I'll take it. So that
we don't have those problems.
No. But in terms of Israel, I always wanted to go to Israel when I was a kid. Never could afford to. So my first time, I went on Birthright, and it was incredible. Actually, the first time I was going to go on Birthright with my high school girlfriend, who was a good experience. Thankfully, that one didn't work out. But I'm much happier now. But anyways, we ended up deciding not to go on that trip. Mainly my mother said no because it was right when there was a bombing that had targeted University of Montreal students. And they were off by 2 days because the schedule had changed. So thank God they were okay. But it was a suicide bombing. My mom said, you can't go. I said, okay. 6 months later, I said, I didn't go that time. I'm going to go this time. Mom, I already didn't go because he didn't want me to. And so we went. Of course, she was nervous. But so I guess it was in February of my freshman year in college. And excuse me, it was unbelievable. I fell in love with the country, of course, as everybody does. And I had one of the last opportunities to kiss the ground because it was before, when I got off the plane, because it was before they built the new gorgeous terminal. Exactly, it's a gorgeous terminal. And frankly, the ground isn't that delicious. But it was special.
Symbolic,
Carol Sue got off and she could
I know,
kiss
I
the
was
ground in
just
the
thinking
United States. She didn't kiss the ground in Israel.
Oh, I thought it was
She was so happy to come back. Well, her husband was in the hospital for
She had
that time, you know.
Yeah. So there was Birthright. I went back with Hillel to talk about York University in Toronto, to talk about pluralism and how different religions can speak to each other, and we studied at different places, and it was great. Then I lived there for a year for rabbinical school, and then I've been back a couple of times since.
How was that 1 year?
The 1 year is incredible. It's the difference between knowing Israel as a tourist and like, it's like seeing that really hot girl back when you're in high school and like getting to talk to her. It's amazing. It's like, wow, she looked at me. That's the relationship with Israel and Easter. When you live there, you really get to know. And you get to see the positive sides, you get to see the troubling sides, and there are troubling sides. But overall, for me, it was a love. It was a life of love living there for a year and getting to experience everything. And going back is just so special every time.
When are you going there?
When am I going back? With Temple Emanu, summer of 2014.
Oh, is that when they're going?
Yes,
I wasn't able
need
to
to
go to
send
that
out
meeting,
another.
but I might be interested.
I need to
I
send
never
out
can
another
afford
email.
it. That's the problem.
Yes.
If I keep waiting, I'll never
It
afford
keeps
it.
going up.
Well, the more people we can get on the trip, the lower the costs end up being. So it is. What happened is it's open to anybody who wants to come on our trip with us to go to Israel. But only Emmanuel people got input into what kind of trip it would be, because it is a trip.
Well, are they trying to combine it with another temple so they can get more people? That's what my mom's temple did.
We're going to invite other synagogues, but it's strictly, it is an Emmanuel-led trip. I wanted to keep it principally Emmanuel because it's also about our community.
Sure.
And you're going in the summer?
Yes.
Oh, not interested then.
Well, the summer, it's also gorgeous. Summer.
When that June trip?
Right.
Time. Oh,
It'll probably be later. I mean, there are benefits and drawbacks. We picked summer because winter simply won't work with our schedule. Winter, you don't know if roads are going to be flooded out. My sister wasn't able to go to the Dead Sea in the winter because the road was flooded because of rain. Summer, it's hot, but we stay in air conditioning at the hottest points in time. It does mean you can go swimming in the Mediterranean. Winter, you can't do that.
it was great.
Oh yeah. So.
I got down, I couldn't get back up again. It was fun.
We made it up.
The rabbi picked me back up. Her and two young girls, they uprighted me again. So once I started to float, I couldn't put my leg down.
That was so funny.
It was so funny.
The other thing to note about this trip is that there will be a lot of people on this trip that it's a second time around. So it's not a first time you get to know Israel trip, though you can still go and have an amazing time if it's your first time. But one of the things that this will be is we'll see some stuff you wouldn't see on a first time around trip, and there'll also be flexibility where there'll be a couple things we're doing in the afternoon or one. But there will be some of those things where you can either do that or you can wander around Jerusalem and do what you want and come meet us later. And so it's a trip that will offer more flexibility. So it should be fun for all. That being said, I must get back to the temple for a religious school committee meeting. Thank you all for coming.
What time is the dinner tomorrow?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
Yes.
And literally can you pay at the door, or do you have to RSVP?
We never
or?
turned up.
Yeah, it's better if you can RSVP so
Yeah.
that Derek can order
Ordering
more food, but
food.
you can also pay at the door. Yes.
Oh, I got to see the play My Name is Asha Lev yesterday.
That's what the kids at Miller are doing Sunday.
Oh, really? It was really good. The acting was amazing.
Have you read the book?
I thought I did, but when I saw the play, I realized I must have read a different book he wrote.
Any Mordechai Richler that you can get your hands on is a fantastic, very colorful read.
There's a play here at the Forum about the Shin Bat. Did you guys hear about that?
Gatekeepers, yes, I was hoping to see it, but not a play, it's a movie.
A movie, I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping to see it, but the hours were not.
Oh, it's no longer there anymore?
I don't know. Maybe they'll have it this coming
Sometimes
weekend.
they bring them back.
Yeah.
They held them over.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll see you
Thank
tomorrow
you,
night.
people in cyberspace. I will see you tomorrow night. Expect a fun evening. Very fun.
Okay.
Yes.
And are we meeting next week?
Next week, I believe we have class next week. Hold on, let me check my calendar. Sir, do you have the schedule?
I can look it up.
Oh yes, we do have class.
It's
next
good,
week.
it's
We're
good.
talking
You
about
should try it. It's really
Shavuos.
delicious.
Shavuos.
I needed to get something to drink, and I'm glad I had this
Yeah.
opportunity. I never had the
I just
peppermint
love the
before.
smell of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
delicious.
I love York peppermint pan.
Me too.
Because it reminds you of your college, right?
Oh,
Oh, good, good.
No, just because it tasted.
Yeah. I used to like those old commercials.
Was there a strong hello in York?
Yes, very strong. Conversation for another day, though, because I must.
Have a nice
vamos.
one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Your shoes and your bag match.
I try to
Yeah?
coordinate it.
Very nice.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Next week.
April.
Yep.
What's the singles event? Tomorrow?
Take care.
Saturday?
I've never-
Are you going?
Yeah.
What's the age group for it?
46 and up.
Oh, wow.
That's a strange.
And I
Amount.
said to Janine,